Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast, in which we talk all things sustainability with some of the most distinguished experts in the cannabis industry. I'm your host, Rodrigo Pereira, VP of Product Management at Grow IQ. Today, joining us for a great conversation is one of our founding members, David Valencorp, CEO of the GMP Collective. David brings a wealth of experience in good manufacturing practices, or GMP, and quality systems. David will dive into what GMP and quality systems mean for cannabis operators and the industry at large, what are some of the best practices around quality in cannabis, and how GMP and quality systems help not only in driving sustainability, but also risk mitigation. It's a quality episode, pun definitely intended, so don't miss out. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast. Today, we'll be touching on, maybe a topic that people don't associate necessarily with cannabis cultivation and the cannabis industry, but is incredibly important. So today, we're really fortunate to have David Valencorp, CEO of the GMP Collective and one of the founding members of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition. David, welcome.
Hey, Rodrigo. It's a pleasure to be here. This is really exciting.
David, so again, thank you so much for joining. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty of good manufacturing practices, quality systems, all that good stuff, I'd be super interested in hearing a little bit more about your background, how you got into the cannabis industry, and given that you're a founding member of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition, I think, what are some of your interests in sustainability?
Yeah, no, great question. So like most people, I think I have a, non-traditional pathway into the cannabis industry. There's either you are a legacy grower for decades or you just have a passion and somehow found your way here. I'm on the latter in terms of I've got a master's of science. That's kind of my educational classic background, actually in environmental science and geology. So it's here coming almost full circle finally with the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition. I did a lot of environmental testing work, so quality control. I'm very familiar with the instruments that all the laboratory testing uses to get the test results, whether it's from cannabinoids to pesticides, mycotoxins, etc. Worked on the BP oil spill assessment. That was kind of fun. So that's where you kind of see my background in terms of government regulatory compliance and whatnot. So we were managing all of the damage assessment work from Florida to Texas. There was a fun team of 5 of us in a little office in downtown New Orleans, and somehow got connected with a startups group that was had a gentleman that had patented one of the first disposable vape pens, and he was living in New Orleans while his girlfriend was going to school there, but his company was in California. And long story short, started asking him a lot of questions, and you realize that they don't have a process for documenting things, for making sure things are sustainable and repeatable, and you recognize the value of that. And we just kind of started talking from there, and I learned a lot and got involved in some cannabis consulting and started working with some folks in Canada. Went through some ISO training, GMP training, and was working with some large companies trying to get exported to Europe, which requires a much higher bar than in terms of documentation, processes, data analyses, all that good happy stuff. And so here I am.
Awesome, David. And well, first of all, your bio on the BP oil spill is fascinating. Just the fact that there are 5 of you doing all that damage assessment seems wild.
Yeah, I mean, we had, there were 5 of us doing all the coordination efforts between, the stakeholders. Literally, we're a direct contractor to the Department of Interior through our consulting firm that was based in Boston, actually. And, there were probably, over 100 people that I would engage with in a given kind of quarter, from every state entity to the responsible party being BP to the feds to the, biologists, microbiologists, marine biologists, phytoplankton, zoology experts. It was quite an effort.
Fascinating. So, David, kind of piggybacking on that, I want to get back to the idea of sustainability, and I think where your interests lie, and again, maybe what attracted you to be a founding member of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition.
Yeah, great question. So I've had the pleasure to get to know Peter for quite a while now through kind of Brian Anderson, another, founder of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition. And, there's a lot of coalitions and a lot of industry groups in the cannabis space. It, never ceases to amaze me how every day it seems like a new group is popping up. What I think is different about the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition is that there's a pretty clear message here in terms of sustainability. And while that's a really broad topic, almost to the detriment in some ways of, well, is this just a buzzword? Like, what does that really mean? But, identifying standardization is how you're able to scale through, whether it's, basic principles of economies of scale, et cetera, but imparting, this is a plant. The industry, I think a lot of the target demographics are, focused on, more earthy, crunchy, for lack of a better word, right? Just sustainable efforts and understanding this holistic ecosystem we live in. So when this came up, it was like, well, duh, like, the irony is a lot of big companies have come into this industry and, for good and bad reasons, for positive and negative outcomes. So there's unintended consequences with every decision that happens, but to be able to tie that together to, being able to do repeatable processes and show how we can grow at scale, we can sell at scale, and we can meet our target demographics and do this sustainably. When else in the world have we ever had an opportunity to be able to take something from an illicit market from 80 years of prohibition to a multi-billion-dollar market? Let's do that the right way. So it's really exciting to be part of this group to just raise awareness and provide education and knowledge so that folks can, be empowered to meet that bar and know what that means.
Yeah, now, and I think that's a great point. I think that 2 points in terms of identifying standardization and then repeatability. I think as the industry scales, as you said it, it's almost like a manufacturing process. You want to make sure your tolerances are tight. You want to make sure that it is consistent and repeatable, and you're getting good quality every time. So, I think you're right in the middle of that, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to tease out maybe a couple of other things. I know you love the outdoors and you are out as much as you can. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm here just outside of Denver, Colorado right now. And of course, the timing of the recording, we just got our epic dumping of snow. So I'm, yearning to be on the side of a mountain right now with my backcountry skis. But, work and life, you got to have priorities. So yeah, I've signed up. I'm a runner, almost just for sanity reasons and mental health reasons, I think is where I find one of my biggest benefits. So just being outside is my happy place. I have a great little patio, and I know we're not on screen right now and it's a little cold with the 2 feet of fresh snow on the ground, but if it's warm enough, which with 300 days of sunshine, I'll be on my back patio working as much as possible. If not, actually camping in the mountains, running, hiking, all that fun stuff.
I hear. Well, I guess it's probably a similar feeling up here in the Northeast, which you get a little bit of the sunshine, a little bit of nice weather. You just want to be outside.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and David, I'll just point out one fun fact that you discussed is that you were a contractor at the Department of Defense just before joining the cannabis industry. And, it's been fascinating in a couple of other conversations with the folks at 365 Cannabis and then at Buddy's Brand. They also had defense backgrounds. So it's just interesting to see, a few more people from defense coming into this industry because you don't typically associate the two.
No, you definitely don't. And, while I love some of my colleagues I worked with there, it was a very, there were only a few select people that I really opened up and told in 2017 when I was like, hey, so I'm leaving this job with stability and whatnot to dive into the opportunity of helping the cannabis space. But I think there's a lot of parallels in terms of back to standardization, right?
Yep.
If there's anything the DoD has really well dialed down, whether you're a contractor or direct employee, standards, and more standards.
So, David, it's a really good segue into just jumping into the topic. And, maybe if you would just take a minute and say, what it is that you do or what your mission is with the GMP collective and yeah, I mean, just I guess the areas you cover in the context of cannabis.
Yeah, sort of really high level, the way I would describe it is we provide cannabis operators, whether you're cultivators, manufacturers, processors, MIPS, whatever you want to call it, even along into the distribution line, standardization through kind of education and training and implementation of these best practices, technical writing, to be able to repeatably and scalably produce your products. And that form is kind of more formally known in the food and drug and dietary supplement space as following or adhering to good manufacturing practices.
Interesting. And so that, that's one thing I've noticed in kind of doing a little bit of research is that you're taking from, or I imagine you're taking some of these best practices from the food and beverage industry, pharmaceutical industry, and sort of applying them to cannabis, or teaching the cannabis industry some of these concepts.
Yeah. So one group that I work really closely with that I'm really passionate about is ASTM International. And for folks that aren't familiar with them, they're a 120-year-old standard development organization. Literally got started as the American Society for Testing Materials in 1898 with steel and railroad standards. And from there, they have like over 140 technical committees with 6,000 standards that are implemented and codified into law across the world. They formed D37, the Committee on Cannabis, in 2017, and I'm one of the volunteer officers at that nonprofit, where we help through members. It's a bottom-up approach to develop consensus-based standards. And to your point, some of the best standards that come out of there are all modified and adapted from whether it's food, dietary, drugs, again, et cetera, or ISO 9001, a standard for quality management systems. It's those best practices that, it's an ag product, but again, you want to produce something consistent and reliable, both from a health standpoint and just from a business standpoint. So how developing those standards so that folks have that framework to follow, which has implications and applicability for regulators and businesses alike. So, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense. And so I think to follow in that thread, David. So, maybe a lot of our audience might not know what GMP is or quality systems are. And I think maybe one of the first things that comes to mind is auditing, right? And it's kind of scary. So, if you could give the audience, what it is that implementing GMP or a quality system does, and why would you want to do it? And then what would be some of the benefits?
Yeah. So great questions, Rodrigo. Auditing or self-assessments, however you want to word it, can be kind of a scary word, especially for this industry where, again, depending on where you come from, if you're a legacy operator that's come into this space or you have that background, documenting things and exposing yourself is kind of a no-go historically. But how do you improve? How do you know your blind spots? And say you and me, Rodrigo, we're working together, and I don't know. I run the extractors during the day shift. You run it during the night shift. I want to go on vacation and know that you've got this, and that how you run it is similar to how I run it.
Yep.
And auditing provides, again, not from a financial standpoint, although that's of course a component of it, but actually operational audits. So going in, having an independent, impartial set of eyes from within your team, or hiring an external person to come in and say, are the training documents in order? Are your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, up to par? Are people filling out the records consistently? Are there even records to tie back to those procedures in areas of, training, testing, environmental monitoring, preventive maintenance, and being able to come back and say objectively, here's where some of your weak areas are, so that where they are, and you can improve on them and implement changes. And then you can verify that those changes were made to help provide, again, management with that visibility that here's the health of our operation, here's how we drive improvement, as well, which mitigates risk from a business perspective and from a consumer, final product perspective.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting you touching on documentation and reporting, and it seems like if you don't record and you document first, like you said, it's hard to improve if you don't know what you're doing. And then like you said, it also just helps to make sure that there's consistency across the operation.
Yeah. And that way I can, go to the Bahamas in a non-COVID world and know that the rest of the team's doing it in the same way, or vice versa.
Absolutely. I think we all want to go to the Bahamas at this point.
For real.
Dude, so could you give some examples of maybe like one or two measurements that you've implemented or you've done within a cannabis facility, and what was the goal of doing that?
Yeah, so the first thing, and I think you kind of touched upon that in the opening, and I was like, God, don't jump ahead, David. But in terms of specifications and being able to be repeatable, and one thing that we find almost without a doubt is let's take drying, for example. I think that's something a lot of folks, especially in the cultivators, can look at. And all right, well, at what point do you know that it's dry? Oh, well, it depends on whether the stem or the branch bends or breaks, right? Well, can you put a quantifiable number on that? Mm-hmm. Right? Can we actually look at water activity or moisture content? Because while the stem breaking or not breaking is a really good kind of rough and dirty and tried and true method of measurement, what we really care about is making sure the bud's not too dry and mm-hmm. brittle and crusty, because nobody likes that. At least most people I know don't. And number two, that it's too moist on the opposite end, which means that you can have microbial growth. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants moldy weed either,
yep.
From a business or a consumer standpoint. And don't even get me started on, immunocompromised patients. So is there a value? Oh, there's a water activity measurement that you can put in place and verify. And these are ranges, right? These are not, oh, well, my cannabis is 20.903% THC. Mm-hmm. That's just, too many significant figures without going back into math class and physics class there. But what's the range of acceptability? And if you can put that into as many of your key processes as possible, that allows you to have confidence that it's just a formality when you get to final product testing, and that your products are produced consistently within a defined tolerance. And long story to say, putting those kinds of specifications in place is the fundamental start, being able to measure whether you're meeting or exceeding criteria. Otherwise, it's just another opinion.
And that's super interesting. I think, just going back to your intro, different paths into the industry, I certainly came from similar path and more of a kind of R&D research. And in terms of my work and everything I did, it was, it wasn't necessarily like digital, like 0 and 1. There was always ranges and tolerances and uncertainties. And, one thing I found that it seems like in the cannabis, it's a mix of like myth, legend, and maybe a little bit of science. And you get 5 different definitions if you try to tease out the same question to 5 different growers. And it just seems like that sort of lack of consistency could, be problematic at some point.
Exactly. I mean, and even, folks all say, oh, we grow the highest quality, most aromatic cannabis. Okay, cool. What do you define as that? And you can have your own kind of definition, but again, without that, how does, Dave and Rodrigo sit in a room and agree on the same thing? Yeah. Like, what makes our business tick is that we all have a common understanding of what makes us different and unique from a, competitive edge standpoint or value proposition. So there's such big value in it. And as soon as folks see that, it's fun to watch folks be like, oh, yeah, this is how we can differentiate ourselves. This is how we can scale and get everybody on the same page, because maybe Hulk Hogan's able to break something more easily than, somebody else that's in there breaking the, stems.
Exactly. The picture of Hulk Hogan and breaking strands is pretty funny.
I'm surprised some cannabis company hasn't gotten that yet, right? Exactly. Where's the next marketing idea?
So, maybe changing gears a little bit.
Sure.
Again, I guess we tend to think about quality systems like very related to what you just talked about, repeatability, consistency, making sure you're following processes. How, I guess, how does that fit in the context of sustainability in terms of, I guess, what are some of the options that exist for businesses to show that they're actually meeting some of the best practices around sustainability, and how do you use GMP to focus on that?
Yeah, Good question. Something I kind of grappled with in terms of how to answer, but the way I would portray it or frame it to folks is it's GMPs and quality systems are a tool in your toolbox, not the only tool, but I'd argue, at least personally, a very valuable tool in the toolbox to get you on the path to show sustainability. And, again, one example, let's go back to drying. If you're over drying your product, how much energy is going into those dry rooms? And if you have, identified specifications and validated your process so that it's, you're shaving a day and a half off your process because you're not over drying anymore and having to rehydrate. And what's the benefit of that? That's quantifiable energy savings, right? That's just one small example. And again, without data, you're just another opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that reliable data to then go to a certification body or some sort of third party. There's if you come out of design, build, or buildings construction, about LEED, right? LEED certifications.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you get that plaque that's from an independent body against a set of standards? That same thing applies. There's sustainability standards through ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. There's like ISO 14000 for environmental management. There's the 26000 series. There's all sorts of standards that you can benchmark yourself and show that you meet again and then get credit for. So again, it's a tool to get you there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what the thought that it sort of elicited was, we obviously hear about the regulatory bodies from state to state at the moment. How much do these regulatory bodies look at that or pay attention in terms of wanting cultivators and operators to follow some of these standards?
So that's actually something, working with Peter and Brian and some of the other co-founders of the SCC at the NCI's Facility Design Committee, for example, we're working on this matrix to understand the different state regulations. And the simple answer is it depends on the state and it depends on the day and the mood of the inspector is what we found. But what I will say, though, regardless of the variability, by doing this, and this is something we found unanimously in and outside of the cannabis industry, if you've done this, if you've defined specifications, if you've shown that you're working towards whether it's energy reduction, which really, again, ties back into the bigger picture of having a good, tight process, that goes really far. That gives an inspector a lot of peace of mind that you're not just kind of all over the place willy-nilly, baking brownies in your basement. You're actually you're striving for consistency, which reduces risk of errors because that's all they're looking for, is making sure you're not, at the worst case scenario, harming public health.
Yeah, absolutely. Which makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think, if anything, we want the perception around the industry or the cannabis industry in general to continue to be positive, to kind of highlight, how it is that, these things are implemented to actually provide benefit overall, whether medicinally or recreationally.
Exactly.
David, moving on, I guess, to the next question. I guess a saying out there is that quality is free, but sometimes there's a bit of a perception of there being a cost of compliance.
Yes.
I think, what are some of the simplest changes companies can make to start down this road?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the quality is free comes from a book that an advisor of mine gave me that I love, and I'm holding it in my hand right now. It's literally from 1979 by Philip Crosby. So, but when you read it, this old library book I've got, it talks about where quality kind of got its genesis in the 70s and 80s, where this is a brand new concept in manufacturing. And I see a lot of parallels into where the cannabis industry is right now. And there's this idea that, oh my God, how much is it going to cost to have a compliance department? What's the cost of these kind of policemen within my business, being a pain in my butt and, getting in the way of production and slowing down production. And that's kind of this, that's like a misnomer that has been proliferated. And what we show folks is that quality really is free. And to tie that back to your question of, what's a simple change that companies can make, just go in and conduct an independent audit. whether you have the staff and the knowledge, work with your compliance team to make sure that you're in compliance. That's, number one, because that's where the inspectors are going to find you and your biggest risk exposure is. But look at the basics of a quality system and identify what you have in place and what you don't. And that will provide, again, management with objective data to be able to, and the assurance and, insights that they probably didn't have to understand where your blind spots are in your business. And from there, you can make educated decisions and you can continuously improve. And, GMP and quality is not an overnight thing. It's not a once and done thing. It's a culture. And you start somewhere and you iteratively improve, and it just provides you with that process to be able to do it without just, I think this, or crap, we need that, or the market's doing this.
So, David, I think that would kind of brings me to a follow-up question, which is, for folks that are interested in heading down this road, I mean, independently of reaching out to you, what might be some good resources that they could reference or go to so they can start getting an idea of, how you build that culture, or, how you start thinking about building the quality system within your organization?
Yeah. So, there's a few different ways. One, I would say go, Google quality management systems. Go look up ISO 9001. There's lots of free education and training out there. There's webinars going on. But even, get your team, find the people that, love documentation, and go send them to a couple 2 or 3 day training course on the fundamentals of quality systems and auditing. You never regret an investment, whether it's in yourself or in your company, to, build up your team's expertise from a professional development standpoint. So whether it's like BSI, the British Standards Institute, you can look them up. Greenflower Media has some great training. They've been pioneering education in the cannabis space with multiple university partnerships. Just go start the education path, and then just give it a shot. Make your own checklist, and just give it a shot. You've got nothing to lose by getting familiar with the process.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'd consider starting.
That's great. And I think that's just really good, again, for anyone in the audience that wants to start looking into it, and then hopefully reach out to you. At least they'll have a baseline from where to start.
Yeah.
And, maybe just to bring it to a concrete example, I'd love to hear, if you have like a company that you work with, or a operation that you work with that it was just incredibly successful. If you have one of those examples, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of one of the better example we've had. So we worked with a company to help them get their ISO 9001 certification. And again, for folks that aren't super familiar with that, that's a quality management systems foundational standard that's been around for over 40 years now, has gone through iterations of continuous improvement, just like the process should. And one thing was getting them to go through the kind of the challenge, the process of just writing down the context of the organization and their risk logs, and understanding where their kinds of threats and opportunities are. And from like a supplier standpoint, from a training program standpoint. And management at first was like, this just seems silly. Like, come on, we know who we work with. We know. And then they realized, whoa, we've changed suppliers 3 different times this last year. Or I don't know, I think it was like pentane or ethanol or something. And then they were actually able to look at their data and realize that changes in quality and yield were strongly correlated to those changes.
Wow.
And to the tune of like 5 to 10% yield. And in terms of like process and the amount of refining that had to happen. And it's like, it's changing those suppliers. Maybe there is a risk there, even though it's all the same pentane. Procurement was just looking for the lowest price, or they're having supplier issues. And that's just like hopefully that's one good but small example of just going through the process allows you to really open your eyes.
Yeah, no, and I think just going back to your initial point, it's if you don't record it, you don't know whether in some way it doesn't exist, right? And then
yeah.
I mean, I think that's a fantastic example of what just putting pen to paper, going through the process methodically can just, no pun intended, really yield some pretty significant insights into what's going on. And I imagine there's probably some economic impact to the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, huge economic impact, right? And that's back to the whole quality is free kind of moniker. It's like you can identify by working smarter, not harder, and just reviewing and reflecting. And yeah, if you don't have it written down, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. And I think we can all agree, our days are busy. We're doing a hodgepodge of things. Hey, Rodrigo, what did you do? How did you fill that extractor on February 17th of 2021? Like, do you really remember the details of that? Of course not. Our brains aren't meant for storage. Write it down. Yep. And then be able to review it and see the patterns you'll find. That's the fundamentals.
And that's fascinating. I mean, again, just seeing it from a different angle and from where I sit in terms of what we're doing with GrowIQ in terms of providing cultivation specific data and then how that gets used further down the line. It seems like we talk about seed to sale a lot in the industry. It seems like at every instance there are opportunities, and there's almost like a need to start going down this track of recording, documenting, and you'll find really interesting nuggets of information that ultimately can help you on your top and bottom line.
Yeah. The other kind of short soapbox I'll add to it is the risk of non-compliance and from a risk mitigation standpoint. And so I've done a few expert witness cases, and in my background with DoD and like EPA testing, what we always talked about was, is it legally defensible data? Mm-hmm. And if something as simple as a supplier disagreement, I thought I was getting this much product, or I thought it was supposed to be this much yield, it's your word against theirs. And in most cases, and if you have documentation to back it up, that's legally defensible because it's been written, it's not scratched out. There's good documentation practices. It's not, it's an indelible ink. It's not written in pencil so that it can be easily manipulated. Those are all the things that easily get overlooked that we can help, steer folks in the right direction of, but it protects you. And any chief legal officer, chief counsel, senior counsel is going to look at that and be like, yes, please. Yep. We don't want to be exposed because that's suicide to a business, right?
Absolutely. And I think you painted it really well. I mean, there's both the upside, but there's also just the protection, making sure you're covered. Yeah. That's a really, really good point. David, I think as we come toward the end of the podcast, with more states coming online and obviously chatter of federal legalization, kind of in the background and kind of humming along now with the change in administration. Where do you see GMP quality systems going in the industry? And I think just what impact do you believe that they'll have in the short term and maybe long term if there's federal legalization?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you two examples for why I have high confidence in this, which is that GMPs are the only way to do business. And the reason being twofold. One, look from a federal standpoint. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, 1938, basically established the FDA's authority, gave the FDA the authority to regulate all of this kind of commerce. And every industry that falls under that purview, again, food, dietary, cosmetics, drugs, all require good manufacturing practices to a certain degree. And that's not just a US thing, that's a global thing. So the idea that there wouldn't be some sort of good manufacturing practices requirement as we look to a federal level, and you're already seeing it in states, Florida, Michigan, California, and there's a few others that are Missouri, Maryland has some GMP requirements now. That's one reason why I think it's coming. It's a matter of when, not if. Number two is, how do we do interstate and international commerce? And how do you sell to folks like Walgreens, Costco, Safeway, Stop and Shop? They all have very robust supplier qualification programs. They all are on the backbone of some sort of GMP program. Whether it's in the food safety, there's GFSI. I could throw out, for fear of, putting people to sleep with acronym or alphabet soup. These are all programs that give those companies peace of mind that they can put your product on store shelves. Nobody that I know of has seen a better framework to be able to allow, Stop and Shop, Walgreens, CVS to put products on the shelf. So if you want to be ready for that kind of market, seems like that's the tried and true way. So I would really encourage folks to adopt those kinds of best practices.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, I guess from where I'm sitting, kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Really at least ought to start considering it and see how far down the path you could get.
Yeah. I mean, it's a process. You don't have to do it all at once, but you got to start somewhere. And again, the benefits to your business are huge. So just, start GMP light, start with one single process or one small area of your business and prove it out, see the benefits. And then, as it becomes more infectious, you'll see its adoption.
Well, David, this has been just an incredibly educational, informative conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rodrigo, for having me. It's a pleasure to catch up with you and the team.
Absolutely. So we just had a really good conversation with David Valencorp, CEO of the GMP Collective. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast. If you like what you heard, tune into our next episode and make sure to check out our content on our website at sustainablecannabiscoalition.com and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Yep, we're pretty much everywhere. Till next time.